Hail slammed into the tin roof of a roadside diner. A window cracked from the pressure. Coffee cups jumped off the counter and shattered on the floor. Outside, 30 motorcycles skidded to a stop on wet gravel. Their riders were soaked to the bone. A big man with a gray beard pounded on the diner door with his fist. He pounded again. Nobody moved. Then the lock turned. A small woman in a faded blue apron pulled the door open. One hand rested on the door frame. The other rested on the head of a one-eyed shepherd dog. She looked up at 30 road-hardened Hell's Angels and did not blink. Her name was Ada Mee Whitlock. She was 78 years old and barely 5 feet tall. What she did in the next 4 hours would bring 800 bikers to her door by sunrise. "Stay with me on this one. Get in here before you catch your death," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. The big bearded man stepped inside. Behind him, the others followed. Wet boots, rain-heavy jackets, the smell of gasoline and cold leather. 30 men filed into a diner built for 12. The one-eyed shepherd, Corporal Jacks, watched them from behind the counter. He did not growl. He did not move. He just watched. Ada Mee had trained him well. She locked the door behind the last man. She looked up at the leader. He had to duck under her light bulb. "Coffee first," she said. "Then food, sit where you can." The men looked at each other. The leader nodded once. They sat, on the floor, on the counter. 2 of them squeezed onto a single stool. Ada Mee moved fast for a woman her age. She pulled every mug she owned off the shelf. She filled a percolator with what was left of her Folgers. She turned the burners on high. "You got somewhere else to be tonight," she called over her shoulder. "No, ma'am," the leader said. "Then take the jackets off. I got a laundry line above the stove. Hang 'em there." They did what she said. 30 leather cuts came off. 30 road-worn men stood in t-shirts and thermal undershirts and looked around like children in a stranger's kitchen. Ada Mee opened her walk-in freezer. She pulled out every pound of ground beef she had. She pulled out a slab of chuck roast she had been saving for Sunday. She pulled out a bag of frozen biscuits. She pulled out 4 dozen eggs. She pulled out a canning jar of green beans and a wheel of sharp cheddar. "You," she said to a young man with a shaved head, "you cook." "I can crack an egg, ma'am." "Then crack 40 bowls under the sink." He got moving. She turned to another man, a thick-shouldered rider with a graying ponytail. "You, peel potatoes, bags in the pantry." He got moving too. By the time the coffee was hot, Ada Mee had a work crew of 4 bikers moving between her burners and her butcher block. She barked orders like she was back in a field hospital. The leader watched her, one hand around his mug, half a smile in his beard. "Ma'am," he said, "you always run kitchens like this." "Only when the Lord sends me 30 extra mouths in a hailstorm." That got the first laugh of the night. It came from the corner and it spread through the room. The tension broke like a fever. Ada Mee did not laugh. She was already working on gravy. Her diner was a small square building painted the color of desert sand. It sat off the shoulder of the old highway with a hand-painted sign that read "Whitlock's Coffee, Pie, No Trouble." She had run it alone for 12 years, ever since her husband died. Before that, they had run it together. Before that, she had been a Marine Corps nurse. She had learned to feed the hungry and mend the broken in a canvas tent overseas, and she had been doing it in one form or another ever since. The bikers ate everything she cooked. They ate slow at first, then faster, like men who had not remembered they were starving. She kept refilling their plates. When the beef ran out, she pulled a pot of chili from the back cooler. When the biscuits ran out, she made pancakes. When the pancake mix ran out, she cracked more eggs. When the eggs ran low, she opened a jar of peaches and set it in the middle of the counter with a stack of spoons. The storm outside kept slamming her roof. Every so often a piece of it would let go and clatter down the shingles. Ada Mee would glance up, sigh once, and go back to the stove. The leader introduced himself over his third plate. His name was Deacon. He rode for the Berdu chapter out of San Bernardino. The men with him were from Nevada, Arizona, and a few from New Mexico. They had been riding a memorial run for a brother who had died in June. The storm had caught them 30 miles out from Kingman, with 2 bikes running on fumes and no cell service. "You're the only place with a light on for 40 miles, Deacon said. "I know," Ada Mee said. "That's why I keep the light on." She set a fresh pot of coffee in front of him. She did not sit down. Corporal Jacks padded around from behind the counter and rested his head on her knee. She scratched his ear without looking. Somewhere around midnight, one of the younger bikers pulled out his wallet. Ada Mee saw it before he even opened it. "Put that away," she said. "Ma'am, we've eaten enough food for a wedding party." "I know what you've eaten. Put it away." He looked at Deacon. Deacon shook his head once. The wallet went back in the pocket. Ada Mee wiped her hands on her apron. She sat down at the counter for the first time all night. She poured herself a cup of coffee. She looked tired in a way that even the coffee could not fix. "Ma'am," Deacon said, "we can't just eat you out of house and home and ride off." "Sure you can. That's what a house is for." "It ain't right." "Right and wrong don't feed hungry men in a storm. Kindness does. You'll pay it forward one day or you won't. Either way, it ain't my concern." Deacon was quiet for a long moment. He was watching her hands, old hands, working hands, nails cut short, a gold wedding band on the left ring finger, worn thin from 50 years of scrubbing. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what's the story with the sign out front?" "Which sign?" "The one on the fence. Says condemned." Ada Mee's shoulders dropped half an inch. She stared into her coffee. "That's the old house," she said. "My house, where I lived with Bill. County came out 3 months ago. Said the beams are gone. Said the foundation shifted after the last rain. Said it's not safe to sleep in." "So where you sleeping?" "Back room here, cot in a hot plate, Jacks and me. We manage." "What about the roof on this place?" She almost smiled. "You mean the roof that's currently trying to leave the building?" Deacon nodded. "Filed a claim with the VA last November. Bill was a Marine, 2 tour. Purple Heart the second time. They cover surviving spouses for certain hardships. I checked the box. I filed the paperwork. I called 4 times. They denied it in April. Said the roof damage isn't service-connected. I appealed. They denied it again in July." "Why?" "Some clerk in Phoenix decided a roof ain't a wound. I got the letter in a drawer if you want to read it." Nobody said a word. Ada Mee took a sip of her coffee. She looked up. 30 bikers were staring at her. "Don't look at me like that," she said. "I ain't asking for anything. You asked, I told you." Deacon set down his mug. He looked at the man on his right. The man on his right looked at the man across from him. Something passed between them without a word. Ada Mee did not see it. She was already up, moving toward the back to refill the sugar tin. The storm broke around 3 in the morning. By 4, the rain had softened to a drizzle. By 5, the sky over the desert was turning the color of old iron. The bikers pulled their dried jackets off the line and put them back on. They rinsed their mugs in the sink and stacked them beside the coffee pot. Deacon was the last one to leave. He stood at the door with his helmet in his hand. Corporal Jacks sat at his feet, tail thumping. "Ma'am," Deacon said, "thank you." "You're welcome, ride safe." He put on his helmet. He stepped outside into the gray dawn. 30 engines coughed to life at once. The sound rolled over the desert and shook the windows. Ada Mee stood at the door and watched them go. twin lines of taillights sliding away down the wet blacktop toward the eastern horizon. Then they were gone. Ada Mee closed the door. She locked it. She turned around and looked at her diner. Every plate she owned was in the sink. Every pot was on the stove. Every mug was on the counter. The floor was tracked with dried mud in the shape of 30 pairs of boots. The tin roof had a new hole in it where the hail had punched through, and a slow trickle of rainwater was running down the wall behind the register. She sighed. She rolled up her sleeves. She got a bucket. For the next 2 hours she cleaned. She scrubbed grease off the burners. She washed every dish. She mopped every square foot of the floor. She emptied the bucket 4 times. She patched the hole in the roof from the inside with a folded dish towel and a strip of duct tape because it was all she had. Corporal Jacks followed her from room to room. He watched her work. He did not know why she was so quiet. When she was done, she sat down at the counter with her last cup of coffee. She looked around at her diner. It was clean. It was empty. It was quiet. She thought about Bill. She thought about the way he used to sit at the end stool and read the paper while she opened up. She thought about the way he would fold the paper in half when a customer came in and stand up and go behind the counter to work the grill without ever being asked. She reached under the register. She pulled out a small wooden case. Inside was a triangle of blue and white cloth, folded tight, with a single spent brass casing tucked into the fold. The flag from Bill's funeral, 12 years old and still crisp at the corners. She held it in her lap for a minute, then she put it back. "Well, boy," she said to Jacks, "that was quite a night." Jacks licked her hand. Ada Mee smiled a small, tired smile. She thought the story was over. She was wrong. She heard it before she saw it. At first she thought it was the plumbing, a low hum in the walls, a vibration through the floorboards. Then she thought it was thunder, but the sky outside was clear. Corporal Jacks was already at the door. His ears were up. His one good eye was locked on the highway. Ada Mee walked to the window. She squinted through the glass. The eastern horizon was full of headlights. Not 30. Not 50. Hundreds. A river of white lights coming down the old 2-lane, still miles off but growing by the second. Behind the headlights, the low sound was resolving into something she recognized. It was the sound of engines. It was the sound of a lot of engines. The rumble climbed until the water in her sink started to shiver, until the coffee cup on her counter walked itself half an inch to the left, until Corporal Jacks began to whine. Ada Mee stepped out onto her gravel driveway in her apron and her house shoes. She shielded her eyes against the rising sun. The first wave of motorcycles crested the ridge east of her diner. Behind them came another wave. Behind that, another. They kept coming. Big bikes, chrome bikes, road-worn bikes with saddlebags. And behind the motorcycles came pickup trucks. And behind the pickup trucks came flatbed trailers stacked high with lumber. And behind those came a cement mixer. 800 riders. That was the count she would learn later. 800 Hells Angels from every chapter west of the Mississippi. Burdu, Oakland, Reno, Phoenix, Albuquerque, Salt Lake. Even a group that had ridden all the way in from the Dakotas. They filled her driveway. They filled the shoulder of the highway in both directions. They filled the empty lot behind her farmhouse. Engines shut off in waves. When the last engine died, the silence that fell over her property was louder than the noise had been. Deacon walked up to her. He was carrying his helmet under one arm and a folded paper in his other hand. "Ma'am," he said, "we rode all night." Ada Mee's hand had come up to her mouth. It did not come down. "Deacon," she said, "what have you done?" "We made some calls." "You made some calls?" "Yes, ma'am." Behind him, a tall man with a clipboard was already directing a lumber trailer around to the side of the condemned farmhouse. Another rider was unrolling a set of blueprints on the hood of a pickup. A woman in a leather cut and a hard hat was walking the perimeter of the old house with a level and a notebook. "Deacon," Ada Mee said, I can't pay for this." "You already did," Deacon said. He handed her the folded paper. She opened it with shaking hands. It was a printed page. On it was a list of names. Names of chapters, names of writers. Beside each name was a dollar amount. Some of them were small, $20, $50. Some were larger, $500, $1,000. At the bottom of the page was a total. The total was more than her diner had earned in the last 3 years put together. Deacon watched her read it. "That's what got raised overnight," he said. "By phone, by text. Chapters heard about you before the sun came up. Nobody said no, not one." "Deacon, this is too much." "Ma'am, there's about to be a lot more of it. That's just the cash. The lumber's donated. The concrete's donated. Half these boys are contractors on the outside. The other half are veterans who know how to swing a hammer. We got 72 hours before we all have to be back at work Monday morning, and we're going to spend every one of them on your property." Ada Mee was crying. She did not know she was crying until Jax licked her hand. Deacon dropped his voice. "The roof on the diner comes off today. New tin, new beams, new insulation. The farmhouse next door, we're bringing it up to code. New foundation on the east side. New joists. New roof. Rewire. Repipe. By Sunday night you'll sleep in your own bed again." He paused. "And there's one more thing, but that can wait." He turned and shouted something to a man near the trucks. Within seconds, an organized flood of workers was moving across her property. Tarps came out. Sawhorses came out. Ladders, nail guns, circular saws. Somebody set up a folding table, and a coffee urn the size of a small water heater. Somebody else set up a first aid station under a canopy tent. Ada Mee stood in her apron in the middle of it all and did not move. If you're still watching this, if this is hitting you the way I think it might be, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this coming, and I want you here for every one of them. Now let me get back to Ada Mee, because what happened over the next 3 days is the part that broke me. The sheriff arrived at 9 in the morning. His cruiser rolled slowly up the shoulder of the highway. He pulled in behind the last row of motorcycles. He got out slowly. He put on his hat. He walked across the gravel with one hand resting near his radio. Every head on the property turned to watch him. Deacon walked out to meet him. So did 3 other bikers. So did Ada Mee. The sheriff was a lean man in his 50s. He stopped 10 feet away. He looked at the 800 bikers behind Ada Mee. He looked at the lumber trailers. He looked at the woman in the apron with tears drying on her cheeks. "Ada Mee," the sheriff said. "Sheriff, you want to tell me what's happening here?" "They're fixing my house." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he took off his hat. He walked over to a rider unloading 2x4s. He picked up an end of the lumber and helped carry it to the pile. Nobody said a word. For 72 hours that gravel lot did not sleep. Saws ran from sunrise to sunset. Hammers rang against nails in overlapping rhythms. Generators hummed under tarps. A convoy of pickup trucks made runs to the hardware store in Kingman every 3 hours all day for 3 straight days. The clerk at the counter stopped ringing up individual purchases and started running a tab. When Deacon offered to settle it on Sunday, the owner of the store waved him off. On the house, the owner said, "That's Ada Mee." The tin roof of the diner came off in the first 4 hours. Bikers with harnesses and nail bars stripped it clean down to the joists. Below them, another team pulled off the water-damaged sheetrock inside. By noon, sunlight was coming through the diner ceiling for the first time in 50 years. By evening, new joists were up. By dark on the first night, fresh plywood decking was nailed down. By sunrise on day 2, the new roof was on. Green metal, rated for hail, warranted for 40 years. Ada Mee kept trying to cook for them. She was still in her apron. She had opened the diner at 6 a.m. out of habit. She had started a fresh pot of coffee. She had cracked eggs. But every time she reached for a pan, one of the biker women in the kitchen would gently take it out of her hand. "Ma'am, we got this, you sit down." There were 40 women on the property by noon on day one. Wives, girlfriends, sisters, riders in their own right. They ran the kitchen. They ran the food line. They ran the first aid tent. They also ran the fundraising table out on the highway, where every passing trucker was slowing down to see what was happening, and every one of them was pulling out a wallet. A young rider from the Reno chapter came up on the porch on the second morning. He could not have been 30. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. "Ma'am, my daddy was a corpsman in the Marines, same battalion as your husband. He passed last spring. He always said the corpsmen and the nurses were the ones who kept us alive over there. I never got to thank one, so I'm doing it now." Ada Mee took his hand. She did not let go for a while. The county was next. A man in a gray suit showed up on day 2 in a beige sedan. He introduced himself as the county building inspector. He explained that he was there because a work crew of this size required permits. He explained that the farmhouse next door was condemned and could not be legally occupied. He explained several other things. Deacon listened patiently. Then he handed the inspector a stack of paperwork. "Permits," Deacon said. "Filed at 8 this morning at the county office. Everything above board. Fees paid in cash. If you want to inspect the work, we welcome you. We're bringing this place up to code, every inch of it." The inspector looked at the paperwork. He looked at the 2 Marine veterans standing behind Deacon, both in leather cuts, both with their sleeves rolled up. He looked at Ada Mee on the porch of the diner with a cup of coffee in her hand. "I'll come back tomorrow with a checklist," the inspector said. "And I'll bring my nephew. He's a licensed electrician. He's off Wednesdays. He'll want to help." By day 3, the local news had shown up. A van from the Kingman station pulled into the driveway with a reporter and a camera crew. Then a van from Flagstaff. Then a van from Phoenix. By late afternoon, a small crowd of neighbors and passing travelers had gathered along the highway shoulder, watching what had become the strangest and most orderly construction site in the state of Arizona. A biker chapter from Nevada had set up a taco truck. A local church had brought 2 trays of casseroles. A schoolteacher from town had brought her 4th grade class to see what community looked like. Inside the farmhouse, the transformation was near complete. New foundation braces along the east side, new floor joists, new wiring, new plumbing, a fresh coat of primer on every wall. The old wood floors that Bill had installed himself in 1968 had been sanded and refinished. The kitchen cabinets had been rebuilt from scratch by a rider out of Salt Lake City who did custom cabinetry for a living. The bathroom had a new tub. The bedroom that Ada Mee and Bill had shared for 42 years had fresh paint on the walls in the same soft yellow she had chosen when they first moved in. On the front porch, a new swing had been hung on chains. It was made from cedar. It was polished smooth. It was wide enough for 2 people. Ada Mee had not been allowed inside the farmhouse since the work began. Deacon had asked her gently to stay out until they were done. She had agreed. She had spent 3 days at the counter of her diner, watching the movement of 800 people across her property, and refusing to sit still, and being gently forced to sit still every time she stood up. On Sunday afternoon at exactly 5 o'clock, Deacon walked across the gravel to the diner porch. He was carrying something in his hands. He was wearing his cleanest leather cut. His beard was combed. Behind him, every biker on the property had stopped working. They had lined up in silent rows along the driveway and around the farmhouse and along the shoulder of the highway. 800 men and women standing at attention in the Arizona dusk. Ada Mee stood up from her stool. Deacon climbed the diner steps. He stopped in front of her. He held out what he was carrying. It was a folded triangle of cloth, blue and white, a single spent brass casing tucked into the fold. "Ma'am," Deacon said, "this is from the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, your husband's unit. We got in touch with them Friday morning. 3 of them rode in overnight from Camp Pendleton. They wanted you to have this. They wanted you to know that Sergeant William Whitlock is not forgotten, and neither are you." Ada Mee reached out with both hands. She took the flag. She did not cry, not yet. She looked past Deacon at the crowd. She looked at the 800 faces watching her. She looked at the farmhouse behind them standing straight for the first time in years. She turned to Deacon. "Show me," she whispered. Deacon offered his arm. Ada Mee took it. They walked across the gravel together, slowly. She was 78 and her knees were not what they had been. Corporal Jacks padded along at her other side. 800 bikers parted like a tide. The farmhouse rose up in front of her in the golden light of the late afternoon. It was the same house she had lived in for 42 years, but it was also not the same. The sag in the roofline was gone. The east wall was straight. The porch was level. The paint was fresh. A wreath of desert wildflowers hung on the front door. Deacon opened the door and stepped aside. Ada Mee walked in alone. She stood in the front hall for a long moment. Her hand went out to touch the wall as if to make sure it was real. She walked into the living room. She walked into the kitchen. She walked into the bedroom she had shared with Bill. She did not come out for 11 minutes. When she stepped back onto the porch, her eyes were red and her cheeks were wet, and she was holding the folded flag against her chest like a newborn baby. She looked out at the 800 people on her property. She tried to speak. Her voice broke on the first word. She tried again. "I don't," she said. "I don't have the words." Deacon stepped up beside her. He raised his voice so it carried across the crowd. "You don't need words, ma'am. You fed us in a storm. We remembered." Somewhere in the back of the crowd, a rider started clapping. It was one man. Then it was 10. Then it was every hand on the property. 800 people applauding a small woman in a faded blue apron on the porch of a rebuilt farmhouse in the middle of the Arizona desert. Ada Mee bowed her head. Corporal Jacks pressed against her leg. The sheriff was in the crowd. He had been working shoulder to shoulder with the bikers for 3 days. He walked forward. He climbed the porch steps. He took off his hat. "Ada Mee," he said, "in 30 years of wearing this badge, I have never seen anything like what happened on your property this week. I want you to know something. That condemnation notice on your farmhouse. As of 5 minutes ago, it is off the books. The county building inspector called me. He walked every inch of this house today. He signed off. You are cleared to move in tonight." Ada Mee took his hand in both of hers. "Thank you, Ray." "Don't thank me, thank them." She turned back to the crowd. Deacon lifted one hand and the applause faded. "There's one more thing," Deacon said. He gestured to a man at the edge of the porch. The man walked up carrying a small envelope. "Ma'am," Deacon said, "the VA claim. We had a lawyer out of Phoenix look at your file on Friday. Turns out the denial was improper. The paperwork you filed in November was correct. Somebody in that office missed a checkbox and used it against you. This letter is a formal request for review, signed by our lawyer, filed electronically yesterday. He is confident it will be approved within 30 days. Retroactive. That means the money the VA owes you for the roof is going to come back to you. When it does, you keep it. That was your due." Ada Mee took the envelope. She held it against the flag. Bit by bit, the crowd began to move. They did not leave all at once. That would have been too abrupt. They cleaned up their tools instead. They folded their tarps. They loaded the lumber trailers with the last of the scrap. They rinsed the paint rollers. They swept the porches. They stacked their coffee cups in tidy piles beside the urn. Then, one at a time, they came up to Ada Mee on the porch. Each rider took her hand. Each one said, "Thank you, ma'am." Some of them told her they were Marines too. Some told her their fathers were. A few told her they had lost brothers in service. She listened to every one of them. She remembered every name. She did not know how she remembered every name, but she did. By the time the sun was fully down, the last motorcycle rolled out of her driveway. The engines faded into the west along the same highway they had come from. Ada Mee stood on the porch and watched them go, one hand on Jax's head, the other holding the flag. The silence that came after was the same silence that had settled after the storm 3 nights earlier, but it felt different now. It felt full. Deacon was the last to leave. He climbed onto his bike. He put on his helmet. He looked back at her. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a chapter meeting the first Sunday of every month in Burdu. You ever need anything, anything at all, you have my number." "Deacon." "Ma'am." "Come back for pie sometime, on the house." He grinned, he nodded, he started his engine. He rode away into the dusk. Ada Mee stood on the porch of her rebuilt farmhouse. The wind moved gently through the sage in the yard. Somewhere out past the highway, a coyote called. Corporal Jax sat at her feet. She looked down at him. "Well, boy," she said, "that was quite a weekend." Jax thumped his tail against the fresh cedar boards. Ada Mee turned the handle of her own front door. She stepped inside. The lamp in the living room was already on. Someone had left it burning for her. On the mantel above the fireplace, in a spot that had been empty for 12 years, a small wooden case waited. Someone had moved it over from the diner. Someone had polished the wood. Someone had placed her new folded flag beside the old one, so that Bill's and hers sat together where she could see them both every morning of the rest of her life. She stood in the middle of the room. She let out a long, slow breath. She was home.